Writing. The doctors had stopped making promises years ago. For 2 decades, some of the most brilliant medical minds in the country had walked through the glass doors of Vance Arden's mansion carrying hope in their briefcases and certainty in their voices. Every one of them left with the same defeated expression. The billionaire CEO who had built one of the largest logistics companies in the nation remained trapped in a wheelchair, unable to move his legs since a devastating accident 20 years earlier. Yet on a bright spring morning, under a clear blue sky, everything was about to change. And the person who would change it wasn't a famous surgeon, a medical researcher, or a specialist from overseas. It was a single father delivering groceries. Before we begin, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the Dad Chronicles if you believe kindness, compassion, and second chances can change a life when everything else seems lost. The city woke beneath warm daylight as traffic flowed through crowded streets and sunlight reflected from office towers. At the center of it all stood Arden Global Headquarters, a monument to success built by Vance Arden himself. Newspapers called him a genius. Business magazines called him a visionary. Employees called him demanding but fair. But behind the headlines and wealth was a lonely 60-year-old man whose greatest battle had nothing to do with business. 20 years earlier, Vance had been a rising entrepreneur with a loving wife and a young daughter. One rainy evening, while driving home from a company celebration, a truck lost control on a slippery highway. The collision took everything. His wife died instantly. His daughter survived but suffered injuries that haunted her for years. Vance survived too, but his spinal damage left him paralyzed from the waist down. The accident shattered his body and broke something deep inside his heart. As the years passed, he poured all his energy into building his company. Wealth grew. Awards accumulated. Buildings carried his name. But every night, he wheeled himself into a silent mansion filled with memories. No amount of money could buy back the life he had lost. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the city, 42-year-old Rowan Mercer was beginning another exhausting day. Rowan's alarm rang before sunrise. His small apartment was modest but warm. The walls were covered with drawings made by his 9-year-old daughter, Hazel. Since losing his wife to illness 6 years earlier, Rowan had dedicated every moment of his life to raising Hazel alone. Money was always tight. Bills piled up. Unexpected expenses appeared every month. But Hazel never saw her father's worries. She saw a man who packed her lunch with little handwritten notes, attended every school event, and somehow found energy to smile after working 12-hour shifts. Rowan drove deliveries for a local grocery company. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid enough to keep food on the table. What made Rowan different was something few people noticed. Years earlier, before life forced him into delivery work, Rowan had studied physical therapy. He never completed his degree because financial hardship forced him to leave school and work full-time. Still, he never forgot what he learned. He remained fascinated by the human body, rehabilitation techniques, and the incredible ability of people to recover from injuries. One sunny afternoon, Rowan received a delivery assignment unlike any other. The address belonged to Vance Arden's private estate. As Rowan approached the massive property, he couldn't help feeling nervous. The mansion stretched across acres of manicured gardens and towering trees. Security guards verified his identity before allowing him inside. The delivery itself was routine. Several boxes of specialty groceries. Nothing unusual. But fate rarely announces itself. While waiting for a staff member to sign paperwork, Rowan glanced through a large window facing the garden. There he saw Vance Arden. The CEO sat alone in a wheelchair near a fountain. His expression carried a sadness that seemed older than his years. What caught Rowan's attention wasn't the wheelchair. It was the way Vance positioned his body. Something looked unusual. Something familiar. A memory surfaced from his physical therapy studies. Rowan noticed subtle movements in Vance's upper legs whenever he adjusted his posture. Tiny reactions. Barely visible. Most people would never notice. Rowan almost dismissed the thought. After all, countless specialists had treated the man. Who was he to think he saw something others had missed? But the observation stayed with him. A week later, another delivery brought him back. Then another. Soon Rowan became a familiar face among the household staff. One afternoon, while unloading groceries, he found himself speaking with Miriam Holt, Vance's longtime caretaker. She spoke openly about the CEO's condition. 20 years of treatments. Countless procedures. Experimental therapies. Nothing worked. The frustration in her voice was impossible to miss. Without thinking, Rowan mentioned what he had observed. Miriam looked skeptical. Still, desperation has a way of opening doors. A few days later, Rowan received an unexpected call. Vance Arden wanted to meet him. The meeting took place in a sunlit room overlooking the gardens. Vance listened politely as Rowan explained his background. The CEO clearly doubted him. Why wouldn't he? World-renowned experts had failed. Yet something about Rowan's sincerity felt different. He wasn't trying to sell a miracle. He wasn't promising a cure. He simply shared an observation. A possibility. Nothing more. Vance agreed to let Rowan perform a few basic assessments. As Rowan carefully evaluated muscle responses and reflex patterns, his heart began racing. The signs were subtle. Extremely subtle. But they were there. He believed some neural pathways might still be active. Not enough for movement. Not yet. But perhaps enough to build upon. The challenge was enormous. 20 years of inactivity had weakened muscles, joints, and coordination. Even if Rowan was right, progress would be painfully slow. Most people would have given up. Vance nearly did. Yet for the first time in years, a small spark of hope appeared. Day after day, under bright daylight streaming through the therapy room windows, they worked. Simple exercises. Tiny movements. Endless repetitions. Some days nothing happened. Some days seemed worse. Weeks passed. Then months. There were moments when Vance's frustration exploded. He accused himself of being foolish for believing again. He accused Rowan of wasting time. He accused hope itself of being cruel. But Rowan never walked away. Every morning after finishing deliveries, he returned. Every evening he hurried home to Hazel. His days became exhausting marathons of responsibility. Still he continued. Because Rowan understood something important. People don't need someone who believes when success is guaranteed. They need someone who believes when success seems impossible. One afternoon, nearly 4 months into their work, the impossible happened. It was a warm day. Sunlight filled the room. Miriam stood nearby reviewing schedules. Rowan guided Vance through another frustrating exercise. Suddenly Vance froze. His eyes widened. The room became silent. Then a single tear rolled down his cheek. His right foot had moved. Only a fraction. Barely noticeable. But it moved. Not because someone lifted it. Not because of a reflex. He moved it. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Miriam began crying. Rowan covered his mouth in disbelief. Vance stared at his foot as though seeing a miracle. The breakthrough transformed everything. Progress accelerated. Not quickly. Not dramatically. But steadily. One movement became 2. 2 became 5. Strength returned little by little. News never reached the public because Vance refused publicity. This wasn't a business achievement. It was personal. A battle fought in private. As months turned into a year, something even more remarkable happened. Vance changed. The bitter loneliness that had defined him for decades slowly faded. He spent time with Hazel. He attended her school performances. He shared meals with Rowan's small family. For the first time since the accident, laughter returned to his life. Then came the day nobody expected. A year and 3 months after Rowan first entered the mansion, Vance stood. Not perfectly. Not without support. But he stood. The room erupted with emotion. Miriam sobbed openly. Hazel jumped up and down with excitement. Rowan couldn't stop shaking. And Vance simply stood there, tears streaming down his face, feeling the ground beneath his feet for the first time in 20 years. Yet the greatest miracle wasn't physical. It was emotional. Vance realized that healing had begun long before his legs regained strength. Healing began when someone cared enough to see him as a person instead of a medical mystery. Someone who expected nothing in return. Someone who arrived carrying grocery boxes instead of medical credentials. As Vance regained mobility, he made a life-changing decision. He established a foundation dedicated to helping families struggling with long-term disabilities and financial hardship. The foundation's first director was Rowan Mercer. Thousands of families eventually received support. Physical therapy. Medical equipment. Housing assistance. Educational programs. Lives changed because one man chose kindness when he had every reason to focus only on his own struggles. Years later, visitors entering the foundation headquarters would notice a framed photograph in the lobby. The image showed 2 men standing side by side beneath bright daylight. One was a former billionaire CEO. The other was a delivery driver and single father. Beneath the photograph appeared a simple message. Sometimes the person who changes your life doesn't arrive with power, fame, or answers. Sometimes they arrive carrying groceries. Before the ending, I have a special request. Comment, kindness changes everything, if you believe one act of compassion can create miracles where hope seems impossible. As Vance watched children and families receiving help through the foundation, he often thought about the day Rowan walked through his front gate. 20 years of wealth, influence, and resources had failed to restore what he had lost. Yet a humble father with a tired delivery truck and a compassionate heart succeeded where everyone else had given up. Not because he possessed extraordinary power, but because he refused to stop believing in another human being. And perhaps that's the lesson worth remembering. Sometimes the greatest healing begins the moment someone chooses not to walk away. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the Dad Chronicles. Your support helps bring more inspiring stories of hope, resilience, and kindness to people who may need them most today. Because somewhere, someone may be one act of compassion away from changing a life forever.